when MasterCard launched our first small business AI tool, we actually used some of our HBCU students, which are historically Black college and university, to help calibrate it. Why? Because it had some biases, right? We knew we were going after the underserved, the underrepresented community with this AI tool and ensure that the outputs kind of made sense for the target organization, right? If someone wants to understand a business plan and they may only have one employee and it may be a local shop, and making sure understand that it's spitting out tools and relating to those. And so that type of due diligence becomes really, really important when you're starting to adopt these tools. And so I think the thought process is that it's not personalized. It's very much personalized, and there's a lot of human interaction in it, and there's a lot of human monitoring that still needs to take place. But I don't think it should slow down. I think it should speed up. I think it should not speed up. Oh my God, it can't go any faster. But I think it should actually, but I think we should embrace it.
Hello and welcome to CX Heroes. Today's guest is Troy Dennis. Troy is currently leading strategy for regional customers at Experian. Prior to this, he was leading MasterCard's North American digital evolution as a leader who seamlessly bridges the gap between a massive P&L and the granular technicalities of accelerating a fintech. With a career forged in the high-pressure environments of JP Morgan Chase and TD Bank, he represents a new vanguard of CXOs who view digital transformation as both a technical requirement and a social force for good. Troy, thanks for joining.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me.
So, when you were first getting into CX, you were first learning about the field of customer experience, the beginning of your career, what was something that really surprised you or really excited you?
I would say, Ben, you know what? It's funny. Early in my career, I didn't even realize I was going into CX. Early in my career, you start off in product, actually start off in the front lines. And I worked in an organization that was very focused on customer experience. And they focused on think of yourself as a customer. And early on in your career, you're in the front lines, you're like, what does that mean? And so you had to really be ingrained into think of yourself as a customer. And it became really a shift in my mindset and thinking about as you think about even the day-to-day operations of a front line, whether in your call center or credit, like what is really happening in the customer experience and how do you feel as a customer about that? And so as simple as the phrase is, think of yourself as a customer, how much it has shifted my thought process throughout the journey of my career.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who come into customer experience like you did. It's not necessarily the major in college or the first thing people think of as they set out into their career, but it pulls people in, and I think it's because of a certain ability to put yourself into the shoes of the customer, to think of yourself in that way. When you approach this, let's call it a process, this method or way of thinking, um, what are some of the things that are different there as opposed to business as usual?
I would say some of the things that are different when you approach that process is, and this is going to sound really basic and really simple, right? It's as you when you think about issues that you are confronting, and you can take one step as you can purely P&L, and I've been a P&L leader my entire career, right? And you say profit, what is the P&L benefit of this? And you make decisions based on a profitable P&L. And they are the right decisions for the P&L. But then if you think about who's the customer, what's the customer impact to some of those decisions, you may make decisions that are not as P&L positive, but longer term growth for the business and the customer segmentation and the customer you're going after. And so I think it's a little shift in your mindset, and you have to balance. P&L is always important, but you have to balance P&L versus, are we providing the right product to the right customer? Are we showing up as a brand? And it also tends to comes back and it ties into the mission statement of the organization a lot of times.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's this classic tension between short-term profit and long-term growth, and and knowing when and where to make those bets, knowing how and why to tell the story with data. Those are signs of maturity in an organization and of course in an individual's career, I think. um, and it's just too easy to get swept up in the short term thinking. But but we all understand as leaders that like sometimes you just can't account in a quarter for the impact that something's going to have over years. So one example, I know that before you worked at MasterCard, I believe you were the general manager at Regions Bank, and Regions is really strong in the South, and there, CX is really defined by these kind of personal relationships, community engagement. And when you moved to a global role at MasterCard, was there some human element there that you really wanted to bring with you or that you didn't want to leave behind? And how did you sort of scale that across North America?
So I'll share a little bit about Regions. Regions is a great organization of the South. They're very much focused on their branch footprint. They're very much focused on the kind of customer experience and being the community bank for the community, right? And so they compete on all aspects of as a large institution. And so they really align with kind of with my mission and kind of my thought process around think of yourself as a customer, really customer first in terms of the product, in terms of the retail branch experience, and a lot of their volume is through the branch. Moving over to MasterCard, I led a global role, but I also took on that community role around customer experience, around community engagement, less around customer experience, more around community engagement. And I led a portion of product, but I also led a portion of Force for Good and the impacts that we had in community and belonging in the underserved population and how we show up for that. And from a national and a global perspective, MasterCard is extremely focused on being that solution for digital transformation and making sure the underserved are within the digital economy. And although more of on a global scale, but if you really peel the onion back, it's really as simple as we looked at our product strategy. How are we helping customers become digital? How are we helping small businesses become digital? Some of the cool things, some of the things we did is we did AI enablement for small business. We made sure that our products were digitally enabled within the wallet because we are technically B2B, right? MasterCard was a B2B institution where I was normally B2C, which makes you really close to the consumer. And so from a MasterCard perspective, it's around understanding what's happening in the marketplace from a payment ecosystem within your region, which was North America, but also globally. Like understanding what's happening globally, and then how is that transitioning into the U.S. But very much focused on my role at the time was very much focused on that community and belonging, what's happening in those underserved populations. I led prepaid as a product, and I also led a lot of our community and belonging efforts within the region. And a lot of that had to do with making sure those customers became digitally enabled. How do small businesses move from cash to digital and acceptance? So tap on phone, using your phone to accept payments. And so thinking about that experience for that small business, but also the experience for the customer. The customer that wants to shop in a small business who doesn't have cash, and like enabling that small business. So that's kind of how I transitioned it to.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're as you're talking, I'm thinking about B2B versus B2C, and obviously selling to a business, there's different requirements, it's a different environment, but also inside of businesses are people, right? And so ultimately, you are selling something to people in either case, and it might be a small business owner or someone else, but the human relationship is obviously still an aspect there, and being able to engage people on their own terms and connect with them in a way that makes sense to them is obviously essential. When you look at that transition from B2B to B2C, was there something that you brought with you that really helped in that aspect, or was it sort of learning everything you know from scratch again?
I think I've always brought that end user and that mindset of, although we're B2B, The businesses are a customer, but who's their end user? And so I've always went from that standpoint of who is the end user of this product and how are we making it, how are we solving and making their life easier, or the things that they're doing day to day and making it easier. For example, for a portion of my time at MasterCard, I led transit. And so I'll give you a real life example around that. Transit in the metro areas use transit cards and they don't accept payments, right? So they're closed loop, they don't go open loop. Well, to do that, you have to go to the transit agency, you have to pick up a ticket. Sometimes your fare is $2 and your ticket is $52.50. What happens to those 50 cents? You lose your ticket, you lost 50 cents. Hypothetical example. Now I'm moving, most of the transit agencies have moved to open loop where they can use your payment vehicle. You tap your card. That makes it a lot easier to use the transit agencies and use the rails within the metro area. Why does it make a difference for the underserved? And a lot of customers are on prepaid or they have other things, right? And so that 50 cent may not make a big deal to you and I, Ben, but for a consumer where 50 cent or a dollar makes a big difference in that lost transaction, now they have a product that they can only use not only on transit, but they also can use at the grocery store or wherever else they plan to use it. And so that type of thinking around, okay, we have a product, how are we helping the end user and how are we helping the segment that we want to help become into this kind of this digital transformation or this digital ecosystem?
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I've had some experiences recently. I've been visiting in the San Francisco Bay Area where they have BART, which is the Bay Area Rapid Transit System. And since I've been away for a while and I came back, they added that open loop so you can just tap any card. And I saw a lot of people using it, just, going riding the trains here and there, and use it myself a couple of times because I usually would do it on my phone, and then you have to wait for the balance to update. And it's always when you're in a rush, you're trying to get through, and then just be able to tap any bank card and get in there. It was really great, and I could, it was pretty easy for me to imagine how that's unlocked. Not only cost savings for individual consumers, but just a better experience overall.
Yeah, really, and really, you think about the customer. You're really trying to remove friction.
Right.
You're not trying to create a new use case. The best scenarios are using frictions that you're doing every day. Your day-to-day transactions, how do you make them easier? And the companies that you see do that well. Yes, I'm in payments, but I'm also in technology as well. The companies that do that well, and I'm an iPhone user. iPhone does a really good job at like making things. Apple does a really good job at making things easier. Amazon does a great job at making that shopping experience easier and removing that friction. Whether the item is less expensive or more expensive, sometimes it doesn't really matter. It's the removal of the friction becomes so easier in your day to day that becomes less important to cost.
Absolutely. I think the Apple design is obviously well loved by billions of people around the world, and I think it's really comes down to what you just said, which is it's just simple, right? It's easy. There's less friction. They've they've systematically deleted everything that isn't necessary, and I think that the tendency or the sort of inertia in most organizations is to add more, not to take things away. And obviously you can add a convenience, but you can also remove a friction. And the bias there is something that it can be very difficult to confront as an organization sometimes. Um, you have some experience working on the product side as well, I understand. Do you bring that perspective into your work today? And how do you think about this challenge of everybody always wanting to build and nobody ever wanting to delete?
I think from a product perspective, Ben, I bring that into I always bring that removing the friction in any product that I do. Right now I'm at Experian. Prior to that, I was in payments. And I think just sitting back, and I was just funny, I just got off a call before joining this. And we literally were just work flowing out a client that's trying to launch a new payment. And there's potentially some friction there. And the conversation was like, what is the customer friction point that we need to remove from that? so it's seamless to the customer. They make one decision, and that decision on the back end becomes very seamless to them from a credit perspective or the data that we had to pull, that we don't introduce incremental steps because of compliance or because of legal, and how do we do some of this stuff up front. So I think I bring it in almost everything I do in terms of it's just an embedded part of my thought process. And I think in any really good customer design, if it's not in there, then it begins to make sense in paper. And I sometimes I like to call them boardroom products, right? Where you sit in the boardroom, right? You design these products, and they make, and I'm not going to name any of them, but they make oh, this is a great product. But then in real life, we're like, and I always challenge people like, what you want to bring this product to life? What consumer friction or pain point are we solving?
Right.
And when that becomes a challenge for you to ask yourself that, then you have to really think about the product, right? You have to really think about either the product, the service, the solution. Like if you're not solving an existing pain point or then you really have to think through that. And it's regardless of industry. I think it's just very it's very important if you want to win within a segment.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love the idea of a boardroom product. It sort of gives me a little bit of like a design by committee vibe. Um,
Yep.
that I think there has to be somebody who's the advocate for the consumer in the room. And ideally, everybody in the room is an advocate for the consumer, for the customer. And organizationally, culturally, that can be difficult. But I think if that's not happening already, it's essential. And there's an opportunity there for people who are willing to carry the torch, so to speak. And it makes business sense and it's good for people. So it's a win win, right? Thinking about this idea of a win-win, balancing the needs of the business and the customer, your previous role at MasterCard, one of the areas that you were working on is ESG, financial inclusion, what you call the force for good. And it's quite common, I think, for leaders across departments to sort of struggle with reconciling their impact, socially, impact on end user experience with their quarterly P&L responsibilities. Can you walk us through like an example or a story around that and how you approach that sort of tension?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Ben. And it's one, prior to joining MasterCard, you listed a few financial firms, right? Top 20 financial firms, payment firms, credit banks in the US. They were focused on customer experience. I think the uniqueness of MasterCard is MasterCard has always been, I think, really focused on financial inclusion. Since the day that they went public, they have it's called the Center for Inclusive Growth. And so I think a unique opportunity was this blend between this Center of Inclusive Growth, which is held by the foundation, and the commercial aspect of the business. And so by doing well, by doing good, I think it was a unique culturally that it was embedded in the DNA of the organization. And so I think they created a uniqueness in that. And before the pandemic, they were focused on financial inclusion. The CEO was extremely focused on financial inclusion. And so, to your point, how does it help you win business? So, when we were go out to our community and our regional banks and our competitors, everyone can talk about a payment rail, right? Visa, everyone can talk about a payment rail. Sometimes it's a challenge when you want to talk about what else, what makes you uniquely different. And when you have tangible things that may not be directly tied to the P&L, and you talk about MasterCard has a ton of public things in terms of, Girls for Tech, community and belonging, globally, focused on educating and digital transformation. In the mix of COVID, community and belonging, dedicated resources to to help small businesses overcome being closed and become digitally enabled, right? Those things matter, but from a P&L perspective, you're like, okay, why did MasterCard invest in that? Why is MasterCard investing in these AI tools? Well, they help you win deals because now you're coming to the table and you're talking to a community bank around debit processing, the same thing your competitor, but you have something a little bit more to talk about because you have
Right.
these tangible programs that you're actually running in communities that you are not necessarily in from a corporation, but you're just helping the small businesses. And you asked me for an example. So prior to joining MasterCard, I was at Regions Bank, and I also led the network. I led a portion of the network agreement. That's where I always knew the leaders at MasterCard and Visa, but at MasterCard, we got really close to, as we evaluated a network, that piece of it became really entrenched and important around, okay, I lived in Birmingham, Alabama. MasterCard was investing in Birmingham, Alabama, but MasterCard didn't have any real major financial institutions in Birmingham. And we're like, well, they are already investing in Birmingham. Why? Because there was a large population of underserved within Alabama. There's a large population who weren't digitally enabled. And how do we help those small businesses? And it was just one of two. And so after that engagement, I made the decision to join MasterCard, not because of the role, but because of their commitment to the community. And so I think those are the type of things that companies do that link to the community and that aren't necessarily direct P&L, but they do help you win new businesses.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that there's, again, there, I think MasterCard, as you've described very clearly, there's a special culture there around this, how they approach this strategically, the impact they're trying to have, how that all ties back to ultimately to business success as well. And, it starts with culture, it starts with organization. And, those things are tough. Those things are hard to set up if you haven't the right leadership, if you haven't already had it in place to some degree. Um, but obviously effective in all aspects. So yeah, that's a great story. It's a great example. I'd like to see, more organizations thinking one step beyond the immediate and going and doing things like this, which will ultimately benefit them, but also, that also has a benefit to others beyond the immediate. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of world that I think that we all want to live in.
Ben, I just want to add, it just makes a difference, right? It makes a difference in your everyday work. And I'm at Experian today. And Experian is one thing about it, it's funny. Although I did this community piece at MasterCard, I was just as close to Experian as I am today now that I was an employee. I was always an Experian friend, and we were at some of the same conventions, the same community engagement things because Experian is equally as focused on that segment and making sure that people have, financial literacy, financial education, better credit. We know you improve your credit score. What that happens, it's life changing, right? And so there is just so much goodness that, the older, the more mature you get in your career, how, yes, you want to manage a P&L, but B, you also want to work for a culture that aligns with your personal mission and your personal drives. And Experian is and I think that's one of the things that separates us from our competition is we have great products and services. But we also focus on the community, and we do things that may not necessarily link directly back to kind of the P&L, but there's the same type of community engagement for the underserved that exists in MasterCard. Different, but very similar in terms of the way they touch the community.
Great example again. Yeah. I think one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is, shifting gears here a little bit, but there's there's this real reaction to all the AI technology that's been coming out, especially in the last few years since ChatGPT came on the scene, and organizations realize the power of these chat experiences, of course, the power of AI tools generally, and along with that, all the data demands that these tools have. Right, you have to feed them with the right data in order to get a decent experience, let alone a good experience. And there's been some public failures, shall we say, of various AI tools, hallucinating, making mistakes. But there's also this question about, how much data are these tools collecting, and where's the balance between, the data that has to be put in and, the personalization that's possible, right? So the more data the system has, the more personalized an experience it can deliver. But there's a trade-off there. How do you think about this question of feeding the AI tools with the right data to personalize the experience and balancing that with privacy and how people view these tools?
That's a tough question, Ben. And I would say it's very fluid right now, right? It's extremely fluid. It's moving at such a rapid pace.
Hmm.
I think that you have to feed it, and it's during my time at when I was in the banking, when I was at Regions, it wasn't really AI wasn't, it was rumored. And I think during my time at MasterCard, it became, okay, AI is here, Chat GPT, AI is here, is coming. And then every week it seems like there's more and more advancements. You have agentic commerce that is coming now, where the AI agent is literally going to be able to make the transaction or make the payment for you. And I think there's two schools of thoughts. I think people early on thought, okay, this is not really real. There's no real use cases. And I think as the months go on, 6 months ago now, it's like, okay, there are use cases. This is real. I think that what I learned early on with the AI transformation is that you literally, it's I think people were believing that, okay, this tool, you feed it once, but you literally have to calibrate it. And then I think your point is valid, and I don't think many understand. If you build the tool, will have biases, right? And so if you build a tool for a certain organization, you cannot just leave it to its own kind of reading, and it's always thinking and recalibrating. But if you're not understanding how it's calibrated, or you're not feeding it the right information, your output may be good, but it may also have some biases to it. And so I do think it needs as much human interaction as possible, especially on the feeding of the data and just recalibrating and making sure it's solving the right needs for the right customer. And early on, I know when MasterCard launched our first small business AI tool, we actually used some of our HBCU students, which are historically Black college and university, to help calibrate that. Why? Because it had some biases, right? We knew we were going after the underserved, the underrepresented community with this AI tool, and ensure that the outputs kind of made sense for the target organization, right? If someone wants to understand a business plan, and they may only have one employee, and it may be a local shop, and making sure understand that it's spitting out tools and relating to those. And so that type of due diligence becomes really, really important when you're starting to adopt these tools. And so I think the thought process is that it's not personalized, it's very much personalized, and there's a lot of human interaction in it, and there's a lot of human monitoring that still needs to take place. But I don't think it should slow down. I think it should speed up. I think it should not speed up. Oh my God, it can't go any faster. But I think it should actually, but I think we should embrace it. I think it's going to be amazing. I think the CEO of Chase has said a few days ago some amazing things about AI, that AI is not going to, and people are afraid about it's replacing jobs and that sort of thing. And it's actually making people become users of it, right? And so it's removing the inefficiencies out of the things that we were doing and making us become more efficient. I think that people need to embrace it and learn it, and it's going to help us become better and more efficient and move faster and actually enhance our customer experience and move less friction out of our day-to-day things that we're doing today. But I do think it's an evolution. It's one that I think we're learning every day. No one has the right answer to it. The beauty of it is everyone's at ground zero. It's, in one person, one of my close, John Hope Bryant, Operation Hope, he says often, like, everyone's at ground zero on AI in terms of learning. It's AI doesn't have any biases, your color, your race, your gender. All that's wiped away. Everyone's at ground zero on this AI tool, this AI thing, and we all are learning it together at the same time. And that hasn't been the case in some time within the U.S. or within the world, right? I think when you think about financials and investments, those things had some biases, right? Some people were further along because of where your background was. You have more experience. This is like ground zero, and this is like changing the world, and we're all here together. So I think it's an exciting time to be here, and I think it's exciting. May not feel exciting to everyone, but it's definitely an exciting time to be here, and I think we're all learning through what it looks like. How do we ensure interactions? And we're going to make mistakes. We're going to feed it too much. It's going to have too much data. We're going to be uncomfortable with it. We're going to pull back. I think the same way we were when the internet came online.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great picture that you've painted, and as you've been talking, thought of there's all these analogies and metaphors used to describe AI, but the one that I keep coming back to is the idea of a wave, and it's a big wave, and it's coming fast. And a lot of people are still kind of standing on the beach, maybe getting their toes wet, but but there's other people who are surfing it. They're falling off the surfboard sometimes. And sometimes they're catching a great wave. They're catching a great piece of it and riding it to great success. I mean, ChatGPT and some of these tools are among the fastest growing consumer products in history. For a good reason. And you're right, we are early. You're right that it is a clean slate. I love the example that you shared of reaching out to HBCU students to make sure that everybody was sort of represented and that it was comfortable for everybody to use. Um, I think there's a lesson there for a lot of people too about you know bringing people in to reflect everything that you're trying to get done, right? And if you have a demographic that you're trying to reach specifically, or if you have to cover a bunch of different demographics, different segments, the tool has to work for everybody. And taking a proactive approach is certainly the smart thing to do. And there's so many requirements. There's so many things that you could do, and it's hard to know. I mean, we're all anybody who claims to be an AI expert is basically lying because even if you spent every day of the last 3 years studying it, it's only 3 years, right? And this stuff is all very fresh and very new, and it's like the internet. I compare it to electricity as well. The advent of electricity, people didn't even imagine all the ways that it could be used and all the problems that it might have, and how you have to set up your wiring for safety or whatever. um, and so there's just a lot of lessons being learned all the time, and obviously the opportunity is massive. I think as we look towards the future, I think there's going to be more maturity in organizations around how they use AI. There's going to be you know new challenges but new opportunities. Is there some particular opportunity or use case for AI tools or processes that you're excited about right now?
I'm excited about agentic commerce and where that's going to go. I think personally, as a shopper, as a consumer, I think I'm super excited about that. My wife is in education, and I am super excited about where it goes in terms of education. And at first, I never really thought about AI in education, but the more I spend time with AI and that piece of it, and how it's just transforming how schools educate kids, and the ability for educators to do multiple lesson plans quickly for different disabilities within the classroom, and be able to customize more to kind of back to the customer, right? Back to the end user, right? The ability to customize it as a in a quick nature, so it's not a one size fit all approach. I think I'm excited about as we become I grew up in an era where we were digital first. I'm sure you might remember this too. Everything was digital first. Now we're in a process where everything is AI first. In
Right.
Experian, we are leaning in on AI. We're not like running away. We're leaning in on say, how do we think about AI first in everything that we do, as we talk about the data that we bring, the solutions that we bring to market, and how do we think about them as in terms of AI enablement first. And I think if you start thinking about that first, you begin to reimagining new use cases the same way we did around digital, right? We begin to reimagine new use cases for AI, to become more efficient and more effective.
Absolutely. Is there, just for fun, like, is there something that you've really gotten excited about with AI recently, or something that you're looking forward to trying?
Um, I would say personally, I'm hoping that this AI, like as we present a lot. We do a lot of presentations, in any organization, and I think, getting AI to the point where we can, as we put together communication and presentations, executive level presentations, how does AI help us with that? I'm super excited at some of the data and the elements. It helps us do research at a rapid pace. And whether regardless of the topic that we're looking for, it has helped me personally in my role. If I'm meeting with a client, understand kind of what's happening in the client, what's the news, where are they going, what are some of the things, and then how do I think about repositioning in that. AI really helps with that. Like it's not always correct, and so you always have to self manage that, right? You have to say, okay, is this right, and validate it with some human. And I think you talked about the human interaction. That's where the human interaction becomes really, really important. But it does help you get to a quicker a point faster, and you have really targeted thought processes through it. And so I'm super excited around how that AI advances the business community to become brighter and smarter. Someone, one of my mentors or one of my coworkers talked about AI probably 4 months ago. We had a conversation at lunch, and he was like, AI is like having your major consulting firms at your fingertip, like your KPMG, your Salesforce. Your major consulting firms are right there at your fingertips. And for bigger organizations, they will always rely on them for some degree. But for small organizations where you don't may not have the budget for that, like you can literally go and it can like do a lot of that initial research, a lot of that things that you would hire a consultant to come in and do. And that makes you brighter, and it makes you smarter, and it makes you faster.
Absolutely. And everybody has access to it, right?
Everyone has access to it. And I think that is the beauty of it, right? And that is why I think when I speak to students, I encourage them to go deep and don't be afraid and lean in on it, because everyone has access to it. So if you don't have that, like, it's your own fault if you're not spending time on a daily basis trying to figure out, can AI give me this information? And it's more than just Chat GPT. And so if you're just at Chat GPT, you're at the tip of the iceberg. It's a lot bigger than Chat GPT. But if you're not using those tools, then you're doing yourself a little disservice, and you got to catch up.
Absolutely. With that, let's cap off the episode. Troy, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I think you've shared a lot of great insights for people, looking to up their game, looking to expand their business, improve their careers. This has been Troy Dennis. Everybody, you can connect with him on LinkedIn, see some of the great work that he's doing over there. And this has been your CX Heroes podcast. We will see you next time.